What are some psychology experiments with interesting results? Mice were put on two sides of a wall with a door in. Only the right mouse could open the door. Slowly, they filled the left mouse's room with water, and eventually when right mouse saw them in danger, they opened the door. However, mice that had previously been on the left side and were now on the right, mice who had previously been wetted, opened the door considerably faster because they knew how unpleasant it was to be in the other scenario. Basically, mice have empathy. Split brain studies. One example, by providing differing information to each hemisphere of the brain in split brain individuals, those with a severed corpus callosum, meaning there's no communication between the two hemispheres, they found that people would actually physically grab their own hand with their other hand if they saw it making a mistake. Basically, each side of the brain controls one side of your body. And in split brain people, you can actually make both sides display a disagreement with the other, which is insane if you think about it. If you train a rat to press a lever for cocaine, and then put it in a box with only that lever, it will press that lever as much as you allow it. The rat will stop eating and drinking and just do cocaine. If you train a rat to press a lever for cocaine and then put it in an enriched environment, e.g. other rats to play with, toys, place to explore, where it could still press the lever for cocaine, it may press the lever occasionally but not as frequently as its counterpart in the dull environment. These findings were a big deal in the behaviorism world because they put a lot of previous results into context and help explain the link between poverty and drug use. The car crash experiment. It demonstrated that the way investigators word a question has an immediate effect on the subject's memory of an event. It was part of a suite of studies by Elizabeth Loftus, with various other co-researchers, that began to call into question the veracity of eyewitness accounts. There have been some experiments conducted, but the negativity effect / negativity bias is really sad to me. It basically says that negative things have a greater emotional and psychological toll on our health than positive / neutral things. So you got an A on a test, that's great, but you totally fail a test, and the world crumbles and it's a total disaster. 100 things can go right and work perfectly throughout the day, but it goes totally undetected in our minds. Then someone cuts us off in traffic, and we fume and rage. I learned about this theory almost 3 years ago and think about it all the time. Reminds me to appreciate and notice the many little things in my day that do go right. Winner and his white bears. Essentially, people who were instructed to not think about a white bear found themselves thinking about it more than those actively trying to think about one. The game. Psychologically explained. You just lost. The Rosenthal effect. The prejudice and expectations you have towards a student / contestant / etc. highly dictates his performance in the long run. Look it up, aka Pygmalion effect. It's not that psychopaths lack empathy, but rather, they have the manual settings. A specific region of the brain lights up when people experience empathy. For most people it's an automatic, subconscious response, but in a study where they showed emotional videos to psychopaths and none while scanning their brains, psychopaths would only light that region of the brain when specifically asked to feel for the character, while the control participants would light up automatically. Reconsolidation. When you retrieve memory from your long-term memory, it is susceptible to being manipulated. This can lead to memories being totally changed from the source. This is why eyewitness accounts cannot be fully seen as true. This knowledge is also being used to help people with PTSD by changing the negative memories they have of their particular trauma. If people have the upper hand, they will put others down to keep it. An experiment told a class of kids that having blue eyes meant you were smarter, achieved more etc. All of a sudden kids with blue eyes formed their own groups. Things like bullying and exclusion of other eye colors started too. They repeated the experiment with different eye colors in different classes, all with the same results. There was an experiment to measure the dopamine, i.e. happiness, hit your brain takes when eating something you're craving. The dopamine builds with the anticipation and peaks right as you take the first bite. Then, after the first moment it's in your mouth, the dopamine levels begin to decrease. This showed that many times we are desiring, edited to show the distinction made by poster below, the attainment of the thing more than the thing itself. I loved learning about infant development. My favorite was probably the development of depth perception, or perhaps the fear of heights. We are not born with it. but, if I recall correctly, we develop it within the first year or so. Scientists created a raised square platform. Half of the floor was wood and the other glass. The actual surface of the floor, 1 meter or so below, was white with red polka dots. At varying intervals of age, the babies would be brought in and placed on the wood end and encouraged to crawl to their moms who were standing at the glass end of the platform. In early infancy, baby crawls over there without giving a shit. At some point though, they stop at the point where the wood meets the glass, or plexiglass maybe, showing that they recognize the difference. In height and the fear of falling, babies' brains are pretty fucking cool. Subjects were tested for introvert versus extrovert personality types. Prediction was that when placed in a sensory deprivation chamber, the introverts would be able to handle it easily while the extroverts would not. Exactly the reverse was found. Introverts became agitated quickly and performed all manners of self-stimulation. Extroverts quickly went to sleep. What the finding showed was that it's introverts who are the sensation seekers, needing stimulation from the outside world. Extroverts create their own internal sensation and project that out to the world. Not entirely sure it fits into the category, but the Rosenhan experiment. 13 people feigned mental illnesses to get into mental hospitals and all were admitted with different diagnoses. They then assumed their normal personalities, but to be released they all had to admit that they were mentally ill. There was a second part where a hospital challenged Rosenhan to send multiple fake patients to the hospital and they would rate their patients on a scale of whether they think they were faking. They identified many possible fakers, but Rosenhan in fact hadn't sent anyone. White rats and black rats were raised separately without seeing each other. When a black rat was placed in the white rat's cage, the other rats ostracized him. When white and black rats are raised together and a new black rat is placed in a cage, the white rats accept him. So basically rats are racist, unless raised to accept differences. Hubel and Wiesel inserted an electrode into the brain of a cat and took a single cell recording of a cell in its visual cortex. By somewhat of an accident, they found that the neuron only fired when an object had one specific orientation. This was pretty much the discovery of center/surround-on/off visual processing cells in the V1 visual cortex. Cool stuff. The elevator groupthink study, very amusing and sad at the same time. The experiment involved several actors entering an elevator with an oblivious participant. They then begin to perform a series of odd behaviors, such as they all stood facing the rear of the elevator. Inevitably, everyone else who got on ended up also facing the rear so as not to stand out from the rest. The study demonstrates how easily people succumb to group pressure to behave in a certain way. The case study done of Jeannie. She was a severely neglected child that never learned to speak. It became apparent that it is not possible to learn a first language as an adolescent. Not quite psychology, but it very cool. Normally, if you try to mix blue light with yellow light, red and green, it turns out as white light. A scientist conducted an experiment where they would shine blue light in one eye of someone and yellow light in the other. The majority said that they just saw the light separately, but some said that they saw a new color that they couldn't even describe. This also works with cyan and red, and magenta and green. Not so much a psychology experiment, but a finding by retail researchers that if a woman is touched below the waist within the first 10 minutes of entering a store, she will leave immediately. That's why retailers who are onto this finding space their displays wide apart at the front of the store, to minimize bumping. Then they pack the merchandise tight in the back, because shoppers who've made their way back there have already been in the store 10 minutes. Wish I had a link for this. It was cited in a magazine article a decade ago. Recent small sample size experiment in toddlers, 18 mo, I think, investigating the link between fine plus gross motor skills and time spent on a computer tablet. Results showed no difference in gross motor skills between children who had spent lots of time on a tablet and children who had spent no time at all on one. Fine motor skills and understanding the task was largely increased in those who had spent time on tablets. A bunch of chimpanzees got trained that they get coins which they could redeem for snacks. Very quickly the guys did spend their coins on the female chimpanzees to fuck them and the girls bought snacks for it. Quite insane. You have been visited by Money Pigeon. Like the video and subscribe within 5.6 seconds and you will get rich.
PG.
On top, food chain, won't stop. New game, hot box that blue haze. One lock, 2 chains, no bras, 2 babes. Mic drop, new stage, lights in my rear view. 5 cops, food race, faster than a Tesla. They say I'm exhausted.